Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 555. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Baselio Altes Allah Shalom and in merit of Baruch Binyamin ben Menucha Lana Altes, Yukasil ben Leah Rachel and Rachel Bas Liba Farkas, dedicated by Pinchas Todris ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rachel Altes. We are literally the second half of the month of Menachem Av, coming from Chamisha Av, the 15th of Av, and as the Gemara, the Talmud says at the end of Masechta Tainis, that as of the 15th of Av and on, the nights begin to get longer and the days shorter in Eretz Yisrael. As a result of that, there are many different implications. It's one of the reasons that there weren't any holidays as great as the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. One of the reasons is because the 15th of Av, due to the shorter days, the sun not shining as long as earlier in the summer, so it was the day was called Yom Taber Mago, the day they broke the axe that was used to cut down the trees that were used for the wood in the Beis Hamikdash in the Holy Temple. The wood was prime. Best wood was when it's most dry, when the sun is shining for the longest period of time throughout the day. Once the wood begins to be not as dry, a little more moist, that's where there are bugs, and it's not the best, the best quality wood. And in the Beis Hamikdash, they always wanted to have the highest quality. So this becomes yet another reason, among the different reasons the Talmud tells us, why the 15th of Av, such a special day. But the question is, what's the advantage of that? I mean, you could think of it as a negative. When the sun is shining, so Shemesh Shemogan Hashem Elokim, you have the bright sun. As Isidis speaks about Shemesh Shemogan Hashem Elokim, it reflects on divine revelation, and indeed, in some Maimar Isidis it says that it's easier to serve God in the summer months as a result of that. What's the advantage of the sun shining less? You'd think it's a negative. As a result, resulting that we can't even continue cutting wood for the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara explains, because when the nights start getting longer, there's an advantage, because the night was created in order to study Torah. It's more conducive. The evening, once the sun sets, not the work day is over, more quiet time, so it's very conducive to studying Torah. So Monday, Meisif Yesif, as the Gemara continues, they started adding and increasing in Limud HaTorah. And it's actually brought in Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Talmud Torah to increase learning Torah from the 15th of Av and on, because the nights are starting to get longer. Which means we use every moment to the fullest. So every part of the season, every part of the year has its strengths. There's the time of the year when the sun's shining most of the day, or more hours of the day, and that has its advantages. And then when the sun starts shining less, the advantage is that we transform the night into a time of limud Torah, learning Torah. And when we add, the Gemara concludes at the end of Masechta Tainis, when you add in learning Torah, and Torah is called life, you're adding life. Yesef Chayim al Chayim. You're adding life to your, because Torah is Chayenu ve'erich Yamenu. Torah is our life and our sustenance, so the more Torah you learn, the more sustenance and more life you get. And that's what happens at the end of what happens at the end of the summer, essentially, which begins after Chamisha Av. Now, this, of course, has a connection to the Arizal's explanation, which we discussed last week, and is discussed in the Maimorim Chassidus, that the Arizal's explanation that really overrides, or you could say, I wouldn't say overrides is not the right word, is the undercurrent of all the reasons that the Gemara tells us, is because after the great Yerida, the descent of Tisha B'Av, where Malchus, the moon, was wounded, the Begam al-Levana was injured, Malchus, on the 9th of Av, due to the tragedies that happened on that day, and specifically the destruction of the first and second temple. So Chamisha B'Av, in direct contrast, is the elevation of that very moon, the full moon. The full moon of the 15th of Av is what? Is a tikkun, a repair of what happened on the 9th of Av. And you read the Tzedek Aliyah, so if the descent is greater, the ascent And the elevation of the moon, and Malchus, is even greater than all other 15ths of the month, even though there are full moons throughout all the months of the lunar calendar. And that's connected because the moon and the sun represent, we're saying, day and night. Sun represents day, and the moon represents the night. Mamshalas halayla. The moon is so-called the master of the evening, of the night. The sun is Mamshalas hayem, controls and governs the day. So basically, when you say the moon is full, that's when this kaima sira b'shlemusa in the language of Kabbalah Chassidus, yichud sira, shimsha v'sira. It's a unity between shimsha, which is the sun, and sira, the moon in Aramaic, which represents the full yichud. When the moon is the other phases of the month, the other phases of the moon, when the new moon, you don't really have that full reflection. Even though the moon is always reflecting the sun fully, but the angle toward Earth, by a new moon, we don't see anything. The first quarter is just the first quarter; it's a crescent. In the third quarter is 2/3 of the moon. But by the full moon, that's when you have the full reflection that on Earth. And remember, sun and moon are meant to illuminate the Earth. Illuminate the Earth. When do you see the full sun and moon union? In the language yichud shimsha v'sira, or yichud za or malchus, the mashpia and the makabel, kutchabricha v'shchinta. The divine masculine energy, that is mashpia, that transmits. The divine feminine energy, the shechina, which receives. The moon, when do you see that? On the 15th of the month. And when is that at strongest? That's on Chamisha Asar B'Av, because the moon and the malchus were so hurt and wounded on Tisha B'Av. So when the sun begins to diminish and the moon shines longer, the nights, what do? We learn Torah. And Torah is at Aisu v'kutsha brichu kula chad, like he explains in Tanya and a number of places. It creates the zivug. When we learn Torah, we're creating a union between shimsha and sira, between us and Hashem. Kol ha'keira v'sheina b'Torah, Kodesh Baruch Hu keira v'sheina kenegdei. It's a reciprocity. It's a relationship. Yem chasanase zeh matan Torah. When was the marriage between kutsha brichu and shchinta, between God and the Jewish people? Matan Torah. And specifically, the second luchis, Chasanosem B'zeh Matan Torah Yom Kippur. So Chamisha Asar B'Av reflects all that. That's the full moon. The full moon is the full marriage, the full union of sun and moon, the divine and existence, divine and the Jewish people, the marriage. And that's what we start increasing and learning Torah. What is the takeaway message directly from all of this? The takeaway message is that we begin adding and learning Torah, which adds another point that even when it's dark, and even when when usually the night and darkness reflects on less revelation, we, the human being, the Jew, a neshama beguf, a soul inside of a body, uses this opportunity to transform, to take the night and turn it into what the purpose of it all was, for deeper immersion in Torah, increasing in Torah. And when we do that, it increases in life, because obviously when the connection, the yichud and the zivug of Yom Chasanase is at its fullest, it adds in life. And this indeed was the Rebbe's directive connected to the 15th of Av, that going forward, we start increasing and learning Torah. So this also adds a whole other dimension to the power of the 15th of Av, and it also, which we discussed last week, also helps us understand the connection to to Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is Matan Torah of the Luchas Achrenis, the Luchas Shnias. Yom Kippur is when Moshe Rabbeinu comes down the mountain after 80 days of davening to Hashem, after receiving the Torah, but then there was the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, and Moshe is beseeching God to forgive the people, and finally he prevails, Salachti kidvarecha. God, Hashem says, I've forgiven them as you've spoken. When? Yom Kippur. And he comes back with the Luchas Achrenis, which is Matan Torah, which is Yom Chasanos, is Matan Torah, but this time in the fullest sense of the word. And that's why in Sukkot and Simchas Torah we dance to that extent, especially Simchas Torah, the dance of receiving the second Luchas, which in many ways is even greater than the first, because the first ultimately were broken. Here, even after the break, even after destruction, we rebuild, so it reflects on the indestructibility of the Jewish people and their connection to Hashem, and through Torah. which is essentially the theme of Chamisha Asabav. But you can say Chamisha Asabav is like the beginning. It's like, if you think of it, bookends is the beginning of the process. Yom Kippur is the end of the process. Because Chamisha Asabav comes right after Tisha B'Av, but Moshe didn't get forgiveness yet. But the journey has begun. He's still in the middle of praying to God. He still would come down and go back Rosh Chodesh Elul, but it's all being fed from the month of Av, as we discussed, the Shalah, that Av, the mazel of Av, which is what? Aryeh, the lion, Leo. Aryeh is a Rosh Tevis, Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Hishayin Rabbah. And what gives birth to it? Av, the 9th month of Av, which is of course the saddest month of the calendar, but it gives birth to Mashiach. Tisha B'Av gives birth to Mashiach. Chamisha Asabav is the rebirthing and the full moon, the zivug and the yichud, shimsha v'sira, the full marriage, which plants the seeds of El, Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li. Yet again, the message of unity and union. I am to my beloved to me. And it begins with Anila Deidi. So all this is leading to Rosh Chodesh Elul, and this in turn becomes the birthing of Rosh Hashanah, the new moon, and then Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot is the full moon, and finally Simchas Torah, the conclusion of Sukkot is the celebration of the Luchas Shniyas that were given by Matan Torah, Salachti Kidvarecha. So this gives us some context of the time in which we are in, and the potency and the power of this time, and the lessons we learn from it. So many personal lessons you can learn from it. How to deal with pain and sorrow, how to deal with setbacks and difficulty, how to deal with the night in our lives when light is not shining as strongly, how we transform it all, and how we act on and how we grow through the process. And perhaps above all, the whole beautiful, eloquent cycle that began when the Yidden left Mitzrayim on the 15th, again the full moon of Nisan. And 49 days later, they received it. 50 days later, after counting 49 days, they received the Torah, Shavuos, 50th day. And 40 days later, Moshe Rabbeinu comes down with Har Sinai and sees the Chet Egel and breaks the Luchas. But then he goes back up and spends another 40 days till Rosh Chodesh Elul to pray for the Yidden. All this is through the 3 weeks and the 9 days. And Chamisha Asabav included. And this all gives birth to the third time he goes up on the mountain, Rosh Chodesh Elul, and comes down on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, in other words, essentially being 170 days, 50 plus 150 days plus 40, 40, 40, which is 40 days and the 40 days and the 40 days, which is 120 days, plus the 50 is 170 days from Pesach, is when he comes down on Yom Kippur. And then, of course, comes after that the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and then finally the conclusion of 7 days of Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeres, Hashanah Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres, and Simchas Torah. And all that included in Av, in the Rosh Tevis of Aryeh, of the Mazel of Av. So you see here not just the wisdom, the eloquence, the power of the cycles of our time and calendars, not just a calendar. It's a reflection of the very cycles of our lives, of the cosmos themselves, and with the lessons, the appropriate and respective lessons that it teaches us in our personal lives. So that's somewhat of an overview of this period in time and where we're leading to. And it all goes in one long flow. And that flow begins with leaving the Mitzarim v'Gvulim of Mitzrayim, all the constraints and limitations and the fears and insecurities and inhibitions and everything Mitzrayim represents. You can fill in the blanks. That leads to 49 days of introspection and soul-searching, the refinement that comes through Birur Amidus of the Sfiras HaEmer. That leads to God giving us the mandate, Matan Torah, in the 3rd month. So you have both Mamayla Lamata from Mitzrayim, Mamata Lamayla from the bottom up of Sfiras HaEmer. Then the combination of both, the union of both, Hashem comes down on the mountain, and Moshe Omer Alei, and Moshe goes up on the mountain. The meeting of groom and bride of the Jewish people and the Eibishter Kutchebricha and Shchinta, Zohar Malchus Shimsha V'Sira. But then comes the first setback, where they build the golden calf. Moshe breaks the luchas. only to repair them even in a stronger way. The process of tshuva and forgiveness, and then returning finally with the month of Elul, a month of rachamim and compassion. Moshe invoking the 13 attributes of divine compassion, leading into Rosh Hashanah renewal, Yom Kippur sanctity and the forgiveness and the tshuva of Salachti Kidvarecha. The second tablets, the culmination, the consummation of the Yom Chassidus at Matan Torah, leading into the great celebrations of Sukkot, leading into Simchas Torah, the ultimate ecstatic celebration of Simchas Torah. All is a process that can teach us how we go through our lives, through going through our constraints and limitations and growing, and then what you do when there's a setback, and how you repair, and ultimately how that leads even to greater strength and greater power, to the point of indestructibility, which is the very message of Simchas Torah, as the dance, the eternal dance of these hakafos. Okay. Now this week is also Chof Av. Chof Av is now going to be, Chof Av is the yahrzeit, Hilula yahrzeit, Istalkus of the Reb Levi Yitzchak, the Rebbe's father. So it's close to us through the Rebbe. It was in the year Tovshin Daled, 1944. So we're talking about 1944, and now we are in 2025. So we're talking about 71 years, right? 71 years. No, I'm sorry. From Tovshin to Tovshin Pehei would be 85 years, 81 years. 81 years from Tovshin Dalet till this today. So we're honoring the 81st Yahrzeit Hilula of the Reb Levi Yitzchak. And let's share a few words about that. And fascinatingly, it's all connected to this very theme. So what is the relevance of this day to us all? You can understand it's of course relevant to the Rebbe, it's his father. But through the Rebbe, it becomes also relevant to us. And as such, you see every year the Rebbe had a farbrengen on Chof Av, would make a siyum and a hadran, and would learn lessons from his father, both from his teachings and from his life, lessons to each of us. So briefly, some of the lessons, the universal lessons to all of us. Firstly, a man of Isidis nefesh. Not necessarily in order of priority, but a man of Isidis nefesh. Gave his life for Yiddishkeit. And that's why he was arrested, and that's why he was exiled in the most horrible way. As the Sefer HaChinuch says, that exile, Golus, is even worse than death in some ways. Sent off, banished from his community, from his family, from everyone. Almatah, all the different Goliaths that he went through, but ultimately in Almatah, in Kazakhstan, if you go there, you see how far off it was from any civilization, Jewish civilization. And yet he held strong. It was Moshe Nefesh. The lessons of Mesiris Nefesh, that even under the most difficult circumstances, stood strong. And he died, unfortunately, in Golus. You could see the Rebbe's anguish over all the years that he could not perform Kibbud Av, when his father was banished. The Rebbe left Russia, the Soviet Union in 1929. 1928. Got married in 1929. So he wouldn't see his mother till 1947. But his father he would never see again. So we don't know exactly when was the last time. But you can imagine the aggravation. But yet, everything was turned into a positive. Because Rabbi Yitzchak continued whatever he could do, even in his exile. Continued writing. As a matter of fact, what we have in writing from him is only from the time he was in exile. The thousands of pages that he must have written when he was still in Yekaterinoslav, the chief rabbi there, was lost to us. Hopefully we'll find it one day. But that which he wrote there in exile, with the help of his wife, the Rebbe Chana, who prepared the ink from herbs and from different materials, and that's why you see different colors of ink as he wrote his gloss on Zohar, on Tanya, and other commentary that he wrote, is from that period in time. And once it came out from the Soviet Union, was smuggled out and was published, which the Rebbe himself, of course, dedicated himself to publishing it, the Rebbe began to explain it every week in every farbrengen, And you could see the connection, the Kibbud Av that Rebbe was showing, but also introducing to us the depth and the lessons of the Reb Levi Yitzchak. So there we have the lesson of Mesiras Nefesh, even in the direst of circumstances, even in the most difficult of situations, and how he turned it into Torah, especially when you see his Shima, how he writes about his own suffering, and his name, Levi Yitzchak, that it all hints to Gvuras, severities, difficulties in his life, to the point that he even sees God in all his oppression. The amount of times he was in prison, the different prisons, the different cities he was in. He connects it all and sees the Gvuras of Hashem, Hein Hein Gvuresav. A man in suffering, he's seeing in his suffering the divine. I mean, you just see from all of that tremendous lessons that we can learn in strength. And many other lessons that the Rebbe describes to us. Of course, his connecting Pshat, Remesh, Drus, Sod, his main focus on Sod, on Kabbalah, connecting Kabbalah and Isidis, teaching us the importance of that, and the different letters we also have from him to the Rebbe, the correspondence from Rabbi Yitzchak to his son, and sometimes we have a little short notes also from the Rebbe to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. But again, a lot of it does not. We don't have. That doesn't mean they won't find it, but we have a material that gives us a little taste of the greatness of this man and his importance in our lives. So with that, let us go to a question. Is there a connection between this day, Chof Av that is, to the coming New Year? Interestingly, yes. The Rebbe points out from a Sefer, he finds in a Sefer, in a Siddur, one of the old Siddurim, it says that Chof Av is 40 days before Rosh Hashanah. What's the connection? So the Gemara tells us in Seitem, Arboim Yem Kedem, Sheyotz Avlad Kedem Shanelad, 40 days before a person is born, they're machris in heaven. They designate who this person is going to marry, Ben Pliny, the Bas Pliny, meaning the shidduch that this child will be marrying this and this person. Since Rosh Hashanah is the birth, the collective birthday of the human race, so 40 days before that, it's Chof Av, the 20th of Av. Because 20th of Av, there's 10 more days in the month of Av, and then 30 days of El. So the 40th day is Rosh Hashanah. What's the connection? So Chof Av comes, remember, 5 days after Chamisha Asar B'Av. Chamisha Asar B'Av is yichud, shimsha, v'sirah, so you see the yichud of chassan and kal, of marriage, and all connected to Arboim Yem, Kedem, Isidis Avlad, before the child is born. So Chof Av is the continuing period of Chamisha Asar B'Av. Moshe is still on the mountain. It would still be another 10 days till he would come down and then go back up on the mountain. Elul, Ani L'Deidi V'Deidi Li, all leading to the union and the reunion and reconciliation of Hashem and the Jewish people that is consummated and concluded on Yom Kippur, but is being built through the month of Elul, Ani L'Deidi V'Deidi Li, with Chof Av being right there, middle, 40 days before Rosh Hashanah. Which leads us to another question. Someone asks, what is a timely teaching from Reb Levi Yitzchak that we can all learn from? Someone else puts it this way, in honor of Chof Av, can we hear a few original teachings from the Rebbe's father? So I was looking for something that is relevant to our discussion here, and also connected to this week's Parsha, being that Chof Av, 20th of Av, usually, and like this year, comes out in the week of Parshas Eikev. So can we find something that connects all these themes together? And indeed, there is a beautiful connection. So Parsha V'Eschanon, and we read Shema Yisrael, and then V'Haftas Hashem Elokecha. It comes from Parsha V'Eschanon. And the end there it says V'Ksaftem al mezuzah Beisecha V'Sharecha, the mitzvah of mezuzah. You should write it and place it on your doorpost V'sechu b'sharecha on your home and on your gates. But interestingly, in Parsha Ekev, this pasuk is repeated because he brings then V'haya Dvarim Me'ela, the second part of the second Parsha in Krishma, and he brings also about mezuzah. So here's a powerful Torah from the Reb Levi Yitzchak that connects it all on Parsha Ekev, on the inyan of mezuzah. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was known for his precision in finding in every letter, in every word, in gematrias, in the numerical configuration, the different permutations. So he talks about mezuzah. The word mezuzah, of course, is an interesting word. It has many meanings in it. But especially, what is its connection to Beisecha v'Sherecha, to your home? We know Hashem Yishmer Tzeitzcha v'Echa Ma'atam Ma'avad Elam, that Shemer Delosis Yisrael, the Shem Shaddai, is an acronym for the one who protects the homes. Shemer Delosis Yisrael protects the homes of Yisrael. So what's the connection to the word mezuzah, and especially to a home? And here's what he says. The word mezuzah is made up of three sections, if you wish. The mem 40, then the word zu, mezu, zeh, and the word zeh. Zu and zeh. Zu is feminine, and zeh is masculine, with the mem coming in the beginning of it all. You could start already figuring it out based on what we spoke about. What is the mem referring to? Arboim yem kedim Isidis avlad. The 40 days before a child is born, when you designate, in Shamayim they designate the zu and the zeh, who will be for each other. The male, the female and the male, meant for each other. So the word mezuzah itself captures the very essence of what a home is. What is Beisecha v'Sherecha? What's a home? The concept of shalom bayis, the foundation of the home. The woman is that keres habayis, the foundation of the home. And the basis of it all, shalom bayis, is that zu and zeh are united. And the mem, which also connected to the mem yem, the 40 days that Moshe was on Har Sinai when he received Matan Torah, yem chasanos zeh Matan Torah. And also all the other times that Moshe was on the Mar, was all in increments of 40. The 40 days from Shavuos, from Vov, Zayin, Sivan, till Yud Zayin Tammuz, from Yud Zayin Tammuz, Shavuos B'Tammuz, till Rosh Chodesh, from Rosh Chodesh till Yom Kippur. 3 sets of 40. So Torah is connected. Torah nitno b'mem yem. That's why it also says Truma is the letters Torah mem. Truma, Torah given in 40 days. So the mem represents the power of Arboim. And what is it connecting? It's uniting. The Torah is uniting the Zu and the Zeh, Chosin and Kala. Shimsha v'Sira, the sun and the moon, Zah and Malchus. Furthermore, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says that Zu is Gematria 13. 7 and 6 is 13, Zayin and Vov. Zeh is Gematria 12, which seems odd, because we know a bar mitzvah of a boy is at 13. A bas mitzvah of Bina Yisera Nitna B'Isham. Bina, by the way, is connected to Mem as well. Arboim Shari Bina, 40 gates of wisdom. Actually, it's Nun, Chamishim Shari Bina. But nevertheless, in other places it says the Mem is also connected to Bina. It's Chamishim, 50 gates of wisdom, of understanding. But Mem is also connected to Bina, the beginning of Mishnayos, the end of Mishnayos, Me'emasai, and Shalom. Shalom again, the idea of Shalom. So seemingly, the Zu, which is 13, applies to a male, and the Zeh, which is 12, applies to a female. Says Reb Levi Yitzchak, because a true union, a true marriage, is that the male, the chosin, thinks about his wife, and the wife thinks about her husband. There's true bittul. So the Zu, which is feminine, is thinking about the 13 of the male. And the Zeh, which is masculine, is thinking of the 12 that relates to the Nekev. That's the true union. Two entities, they become like one, v'hoya lebasar echad. So there you have both a Torah from Rabbi Yitzchak connected to Parsha Ekev, connected to the whole theme of Chamisha Asar B'Av, Yem Chasan Asay, Yom Kippur, the period in time, Chof Av being Mem Yem Kedem Yisidis Avlad of Rosh Hashanah, and the lesson, of course, to us about Achdus and unity, which is the central theme of Chamisha Asabav, to correct and repair the disunity and divisiveness of that caused the destruction, especially of the second temple, Sinas Chinam, and all through Torah, that we continuously add, especially after the days after Chamisha Asabav, as the nights get longer. Why do we begin wishing each other a Happy New Year starting on the 15th of Av? So, a very fitting question to what we're describing. So, firstly, it says in Sfarim, the Munkencher writes about it, and I believe in other Sfarim, it talks about Chamisha Asabav is Gematrik Siv V'Chsimeteva. I think the Bnei Yisachar says it. To look it up in Shai Yisachar. Kaponim, Chamisha Asabav is Gematrik Siv V'Chsimeteva. But it's not just random Gematria. It's not just because they're the same numbers. It's because Chamisha Asabav is the beginning, in a way, of this process. Tisha B'Av is the Yerida, the descent. Chamisha Asabav is the full moon. And Lo Yom Tevim L'Yisrael Chamisha Asabav K'Yem HaKippurim. So Chamisha Asabav is the beginning, that full moon of the yichud that would take place ultimately Yom Kippur, but beginning also with Rosh Hashanah, which is the birth of the human race. The whole purpose of creation. So it's very fitting that Chamisha Asabav, we should start saying Ksiv V'Chsimeteva. Start wishing each other. Because what's the new year? Well, New Year is not just a new year, it's a new opportunity. It's a renewal of the moon, which would become full on the 15th of Tishrei, on Sukkot, but through the process of Rosh Hashanah and then Yom Kippur, all fed by the month of El, all fed by Chof Av, which is Mem Yem Kedem, and Chamisha Asar B'Av, the month of Av, Aryeh, Rosh Tevis, El, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippurim, and Eshayin Rab. Why is Yom Kippur considered a joyous holiday? So we've already touched upon it, but someone writes the question this way. I have a question for the rabbi. The Talmud says there were no joyous holidays like the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur, as we mentioned. I'm trying to find the joyous part of Yom Kippur. Logically, I'm thinking because it's a gift from Hashem to be able to be forgiven for our mistakes, that's definitely a reason for joy. But maybe on a deeper level, during the closing part of Yom Kippur, we are able to access the yichud part of our soul. That's the deepest dimension of the Etzem HaNeshama, core soul, which is usually not accessible. So that could be a reason for joy. Is there a teaching in Isidis that on the 15th of Av we can also access the level of Yechidah? If so, would that also be a connection between the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur? So first of all, the joy of Yom Kippur, like it says in Isidis and Rosh Hashanah, is V'gilu Berada. You celebrate, but with trembling, in awe. The celebration is packaged in awe because you're standing before the king. There's a deep reverence. You don't dance and sing and make somersaults. But then when you leave the king's presence and you go into Sukkot, that's when you start the dancing, and it only grows from day to day all the way up to Simchas Torah, the ultimate dancing. But there's definitely joy when you're standing before the king and he's forgiving you. And you're standing in the deepest level of connection of, like you say, Yechidah liyagdacha. The essence of a soul, of a Yid, is connecting to the essence of the divine. It's plenty to celebrate. But it's a celebration that has to be couched in with a certain measure of reverence. And indeed, Hashem said, not like by Matan Torah was fireworks and sound and light. And that attracted, unfortunately, the negative voices as well. Yom Kippur with humility, quiet, the color white, everything done with humility and silence. But that doesn't mean there isn't profound joy within. And that joy explodes, B'kesel Yom Chagenu, that's concealed. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur gets revealed, Sukkot, all the way up to Simchas Torah. So that's, as far as the connection goes, I believe, if I recall correctly, I think that Tzemach Tzedek does make a connection between Chamisha Asar and Yom Kippur, maybe connected to Yechidah, if I recall correctly. I'd have to look that up, and I believe the Rebbe speaks about it as well. Okay. What is its connection to the 15th of Av? So we already answered that question, because they both demonstrate, Yom Kippur and Chamisha B'Av both demonstrate the transformation from a negative. Chamisha B'Av coming after Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. Yom Kippur coming after the breaking of the tablets and the building of the golden calf and eliciting the Salachti Kidverecha. So it's all transformation, which is the ultimate joy. The ultimate joy is not just a joy that comes from above, but a joy that comes from transforming the darkness. Ein simcha k'ataras hasfeiches. There's no joy as one when you resolve doubts. In this case, the doubt, will the Jews prevail? Will Moshe Rabbeinu prevail? And then it's resolved, then you have the greatest joy of all. An indestructible one, like Shtar Sheyotza Lov Irur, a contract, once it's been challenged and upheld, you no longer can challenge it. It becomes unbreakable. Indestructible. Okay. In that spirit, we're coming also from Parshas Veschanon. I thought I'd talk about one point. Someone asked a question about Veschanon itself. We know Veschanon is the gematria, and the connection, of course, you'll see in a moment with what we're discussing here, since we're all finding the central theme. Veschanon is about Moshe Rabbeinu's prayer, from the word chanin, chanina. We're praying and beseeching God. Moshe, in this case, is beseeching God, trying to gain God's compassion, to allow him to go into Eretz Yisrael. So the Sforim say, Veschanon is gematria Tovkuf Tesvav, 515. Corresponding to the 515 tefillas, prayers that Moshe Rabbeinu prayed to go into Eretz Yisrael. And then finally Hashem tells him, as we read in the Parsha, this was Pas Shabbos, enough. So what you have is a very powerful, obviously, narrative here. On one hand, Hashem allowed him to pray 515 prayers. That's a lot of prayers. And were they, God forbid, in vain? And then he tells them to stop. So in Kabbalah and Isidis, and the Rebbe brings this as well in a number of sichos on Veschanon, talk about the significance of 515, Tov Kuf Tesvav, Sam Chof Av Tov Kuf, and Tesvav, which is Yud Kei. But each prayer you have to say accomplishes something. Because we know, first of all, every prayer accomplishes. Hashem listens to all our prayers. As the Shalosh says, they open up doors. Sometimes you need more doors to be opened. Especially the prayer of Moshe Rabbeinu. Tzadik Gezer HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim. If a Tzadik decrees something, God fulfills it. Furthermore, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu Gezer Tzadik Mavatla. When God decrees something, a Tzadik has the power to absolve it, to abolish it. In this case, Hashem Gzeira to not let Moshe go in. So the power of his prayer, we know, achieved. What do they achieve? They help pave the way till this very day that Yidden make their life easier when they would go into Eretz Yisrael. And that also helps us even today in Eretz Yisrael as we march toward Mashiach. So every prayer made a difference. Just like when Moshe looked at Eretz Yisrael later, when Hashem allows him to go up on the Har, on the mountain, to look at Eretz Yisrael, his look itself also refined. As the Ragachover explains, it helps soften up the resistance, make it easier to conquer. So all our challenges in life are all being helped as we speak by the tefillas of Moshe. And yet, it wasn't yet the time for Mashiach to come, because had Moshe gone into Eretz Yisrael, as it says in Sfarim, Maisi de Moshe Nitzchim, Moshe would have built the Beis HaMikdash, it could never be destroyed. But that wasn't the time yet. The world wasn't ready yet. So we learn both the power of prayer, as well as understanding that everything has its time. But today, after all the tefillas, including Moshe's, as the Rebbe says, we are ready to march into Eretz Yisrael. So someone asked this question. There's a medrash that says Moshe said 515 prayers, the gematria of Veschanon, to ask Hashem to please let him go into Israel. And Hashem said, please stop praying, because if you say a 516th prayer, I will have to change my mind and let you in, and it's not my will to let you in. Can we derive from this that there's a power of saying 516 prayers that can coerce Hashem to change his mind? Are we allowed to try saying 516 prayers to beg Hashem to change his mind and allow the safe return of the hostages immediately? Or other needs that we have? Would there have to be 516 different prayers to be effective, or can we repeat Shema 516 times or say a chapter of Tehillim 516 times? And finally, would it be better if one person in the community said 516 prayers, or should we gather 516 people together and each person says one prayer? So firstly, the lesson we learn actually is maybe we should not be saying 516 prayers, because Moshe was told not to. I heard what you said, Hashem is saying. I heard the 515 prayers. They are necessary. They are going to help break through the different 515 types of resistances, if you wish. But where do you take away that we have to be saying 516 prayers? If Moshe was told not to, then maybe we're also being told not to. That doesn't stop us from saying the 515. The bottom line is what the Rebbe Rashab said, and the Frierdiker Rebbe repeated it when he went to Kostroma, when he was released, Yud Beis Tammuz, that nicht mit unser Ratzen sein wir gegangen in Golus, and nicht mit unser Ratzen wollen wir rausgehen von Golus. It's not with our will that we went into Golus, and it's not with our will that we will go out. This is up to Hashem. We have to do our part, our prayers, our learning, our mitzvahs, our efforts in reaching other Yidden, Yafutzim Einesecha, Chutza, everything possible. But at the end of the day, Hashem will decide when or how. So by all means, pray. You want to pray 516 times, I'm not saying not to do that. But we don't know what God's plan is, so we have to do whatever we can do. That's how I would approach this. And the lessons we learn from Moshe, the persistence necessary. But Moshe understood that Hashem heard what he had to say, and basically there's no reason to say it again, because I know exactly what you're saying to me. Okay, good. To move on to some other topics, some follow-up, some other topics, someone asked the question, how should we react to negative predictions about the future? They sent me a few links. Usually I don't like to mention names, but different individuals who've written petrifying predictions, as someone put it, of attacks. God forbid, I don't even want to repeat, al tiftach peh. So firstly, when Hashem wants to send a prophet, he sends his prophets. And you have to be definite to know that this is a prophet. No one has a right and the ability to prophesize negative things. You want to suggest positive things? We know it says in Halacha actually, that a negative prophecy can be changed to positive. A positive prophecy is forever. And in general, I wouldn't call it a prediction or prophecy. You can say there are signs out there. There are things, there are factors that are seeming to leading up. We see with Israel destroying the nuclear and other military objectives of Iran. You could see certain things lining up that can lead to beautiful changes in that region, and ultimately to the Geula. But the idea of somebody coming, especially someone who does not have credentials, and maybe the Habahatalya, like they say, those that know don't say, and those that say don't know. To come and say predictions that are frightening, that drive panic, where do they have this authority, and how do they know? That's the first part. The second part is we have a Rebbe. I never heard from the Rebbe ever, once, a prediction of a negative thing. He was concerned that certain things, if we don't do what has to be done, like we didn't respond properly to the wake-up call of Yehoyi by Yemahu Yitoka B'Shefer Godel. But not a prediction. The hope is that any wake-up call will lead people to do tshuva, will lead people to increase in Torah mitzvahs. And if anything, it was all a prediction of the Geula, that these are all signs of the Geula, and the Geula is upon us, and we've already gone through all the difficult times. And whenever the Rebbe spoke about Melchamas Gog or Magog or negative things, he said we've already Yetsa, more than Yetsa, all that in the past. And now it's all positive. The fact that there are negative things, that yes, what the world calls October 7th, Shmini Atzeret Simchas Torah, that happened in Eretz Yisrael, but that's not a matter of that happened. And once it's happened, we have to deal with it. But to go predict such things, that is not a Torah approach. And even if someone's so convinced, who says you have to say it? Did God tell you to go announce it? When a Novi came and told us the Nevuah of Churban Rahman al-Tzan, that was a direct directive from God. And even that, we know when Yeshaya says something negative in the Yid, Hashem punished him. So to be very careful with negative things. Al tiftach peh. And the Rebbe was very adamant. There are sikhs of the Rebbe so powerful about people saying even one thing about negative. As I said, it's not our power, it's not our authority. No one gave you a right to do so and just to be frightened people. And then when you discover that the prediction doesn't even come out true, then what does that show you? You put yourself on the line, it didn't happen. So maybe now learn a lesson of humility that you're not necessarily correct. And let everybody else apply. It's like the Tzemach Tzedek said, that he was once talking about something, and someone afterwards came over to Tzemach Tzedek and said, "Why did you embarrass me in public?" So Tzemach Tzedek, "How did I embarrass you?" He said, "You spoke literally about the things I did." So Tzemach Tzedek said, "Did I say your name?" I didn't say your name. And Tzemach Tzedek said, "I am a kaplishmacher. I'm like a hat maker. I make hats of different sizes. And then I hang them up on the hooks. So people come in to buy a hat. They fit the hat to their heads, and they see which hat fits their head. So the words I say, everybody measures themselves, and they see which hat fits. And when it fits your head, then you'll know that hat was made for you. But it's you that's fitting it. It's not I said something. So what I said here, everybody can apply in their own way. But I think it's an important lesson too when you hear negative things, and not just predictions, but even in our homes, when we speak at our tables and we speak with our families and our children. It's not a derech to be negative. And even when something happens that's not a positive, we have to always say, Hashem will help, it will get better. Ultimately, we'll be good, we'll see Mashiach soon. That's not denial and it's not avoiding. It's just that we have to constantly keep that powerful resilience and voice of fortitude and strength forging ahead with full amunah and betachon that we will prevail. Okay. So, is Chassidus impacting our lives? So you have a bunch of questions which I don't know if I'll be able to cover them all, but I'll try my best with the time that we have. And I thought it's appropriate to talk about, but now seems like a fitting time. Chassidus impacting our lives. So, there's a bunch of questions, some of them more provocative than others, some even a little irreverent. But as you know, this program is dedicated to answering all questions, hopefully always with respect and civilly, but nevertheless not to ignore anything, especially things that are on people's minds and hearts, and often don't have the opportunity to ask the questions, or they're silenced by people who are uncomfortable with the questions, or as some people will say, you don't want to hear the question because you don't have an answer, so you avoid it. So this program has always been dedicated from day one to answer questions directly as best as possible, with always the qualification. I'm always willing to hear a rebuttal, a different way of answering it, a different approach. This is open for all, and I have the honor to be able to listen to the questions, share them online here, share them with the public, and then try to answer. So this is a question that is bothering a lot of people in many different ways. Is Chassidus impacting our lives? So Chassidus, of course, was revealed to us by the Baal Shem Tov. We're talking about close to 300 years ago. The Baal Shem Tov was born the year Nachas in the at the end of the 17th century. And of course, then the Maggid of Mizrich, and then the Alter Rebbe, the other Chassidus Rabbeim, the students of the Maggid. But we're talking here specifically Chassidus Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, Reb Marash, Reb Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe, till this very day. So we have a body of Chassidus, which is Teres Achsidis, Minhage Achsidis, Darke Achsidis, Nigunim, the customs, the songs, the culture. It's a whole body. And it came to help bring Mashiach, like Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov that I will come when these well springs will spread outward and will be integrated and internalized. And that will lead us to Mashiach. So of course it's a very practical question. So what, let's do a report card. What has happened in this 9 generations since the Baal Shem Tov? So we know Chassidus obviously became not just we have a wide what's the word I'm looking for, a corpus of writings that is hundreds and hundreds of svarim. The Baal Shem Tov didn't write himself, but his Torahs were written. They were still short, the Maggid as well. But the Alter Rebbe, we have tens of books, tens of svarim. Of course, Tanya, Torah Shebiksav of Chassidus, Mittler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek. So we have hundreds and hundreds of Sifrei Chassidus. And then when you include the stories, and you include the letters that the Rabbeim wrote, and you include the short Torahs, the things that were passed on from teacher to student, from Chassid to Chassid, and you include the Nigunim, we have a whole body which has created an entire culture, entire communities, both first in White Russia, in the cities where the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid and then the Alter Rebbe and the other Rabbeim lived, and finally coming to the United States, first to Europe, then the United States, spreading, and now it's on every corner of earth. Has it reached 8 billion people in a conscious way? Obviously there's more work to be done. Well, do we have to reach all 8 billion before Mashiach comes? Not necessarily. No one ever said that. We have to continue spreading, and then there's either a tipping point or Hashem says the time has come, and that's all part of the process. So as far as the question goes, has Chassidus impacted us? It's really a personal question. I could ask that question, has Chassidus impacted me? Not enough would be my answer. To some extent, yes. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. There wouldn't be this program, Chassidus Applied. I wouldn't be writing what I write and teaching. Have I done enough? Absolutely not. Have I done enough personally, my own Aveda? Also absolutely not. So there's no question that Chassidus has impacted people's lives. Question to what extent? But, as we'll see, some of the questions that are being asked are a little more provocative. So someone writes the following, and I'm going to be editing it a bit because it was very sharp, and writes as follows. Chassidus was meant to refine people's midas. Like it says, L'shanis midas hativim, or L'shanis midas teva hamidesav, as the Rebbe brings in the beginning of Kuntas and Yon Shal Teres Achsidus. Can you point out to me people who you can see that Chassidus actually refined them? They're more refined, not by nature, not by birth, or not by their upbringing, but simply because they worked on themselves. That they were one type of person, and now they worked on rage, on jealousy, on stinginess, and other negative qualities that the Alter Rebbe talks about at the end of chapter 1 in Tanya. Arrogance, and literally seen how Chassidus has changed someone. Okay? So firstly, my answer is yes, I have seen it. Is it enough? No, I've not seen enough of it. I've had the same question myself. As I said, there are many people born, or just by nature, or just kind people. But as this person writes, but there are also not Chassidim that are that way. So where's Chassidus impact? So they tell the story about one of the Chassidim of the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe as well, who was somewhat of a tough person. And someone asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he was a person who was known to be a Chassid and learned Chassidus. Someone asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, where's the impact of Chassidus on this person? And the Frierdiker Rebbe answered, imagine what he would have been like without Chassidus. So that's a common answer. The Rebbe himself, Frierdiker Rebbe, answered it. And yes, it makes sense, but still, is that enough? So the answer is not, and that's why we're here, to talk about this and insist that it should be that way. But of course, as the next questioner asks, and just again, I apologize if this is offensive to anyone, what is wrong with how Isidis is being taught in our schools? That it's not capturing so many minds and hearts and souls. And what can we do to improve the situation and inspire the next generation to internalize Isidis? So here I'm sure there'll be people who debate this, especially people in the schools, will say it's not true. It is being taught properly. The fact is people have free will. So even the best teachers, the best educators, there's still free will. And I would agree with that to some extent. But at the same time, I went through the yeshiva system myself, and many of you did. So I cannot say in the clear conscience that the yeshivas did a best possible job. And I'm not here to blame anyone. We're all in this together. Parents, educators, mechanchim, mashpim, students, we're all in this together. So this is not about pointing fingers. This is about what can we do collectively and individually to improve the situation. Because if you do believe in Chassidus, and I say if simply because I know some people told me, you know what, I don't necessarily believe Chassidus can achieve all this, or it can achieve it with just a few select few people. We'll address that later. We truly believe in we'll call the product, called Chassidus, by Nesecha, and its powerful potential to impact. And if it's not doing it effectively, or it's leaving people wanting, which leads me to another question, which I'll read in a moment. Why so many people are looking in other places to find spiritual inspiration, and they're saying that Chassidus is not doing it for them. If you see that, and you believe absolutely that Chassidus could do it, so you have to recognize what the Rebbe says, Imreiku mikemhu. If something's missing, it's missing in us. It's not missing in Chassidus. The Torah was given by Hashem to be chayenu ve'erich yameinu, to be our life and our sustenance. The fact that for some people they don't feel it's life and sustenance because it's either mitzvah sanoshim ulamada, they're doing it mechanically and robotically, or it's just a cultural thing. It's their, like I said, routine, or maybe it's the same thing what I just said, mitzvah sanoshim ulamada. Regardless, the problem is in how we're learning it or how we're teaching it. But reiku mikem, it's something missing in how we should do it. So we have to put our heads together. In many ways, this very program, MyLife Chassidus Applied, one of its main objectives is to do exactly that. Now, I'm not suggesting I can do this alone, but together with you, together with questions, challenging ourselves, challenging each other, forcing the issue, and all with productive objectives. We're not talking about just criticizing or pointing fingers or just to be negative. We're talking about constructive critique, to grow, and to be strong enough and secure enough that you can hear a challenge. Because one of the bad things, I think is one of the negative things, is when people say, no, it's all good, don't talk about, everything is great, don't talk Lashon Hara. We're not talking Lashon Hara, we're talking about, is Chassidus living up to the potential, the power are we living up to what the Rabbeim want from us? And I think we all understand the answer to that. Without being negative, the goal here is positivity. So I want to make that very clear. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to answer all the questions right now, but I want to begin this conversation, and we'll try to continue in the coming weeks. I think very appropriate as we go into the month of Elul, leading up to Rosh Hashanah and Tishrei and so on. So what the question ultimately is, what can we do? What is the problem? Awareness of the problem is half the cure. Shailas chacham chetzi tshuva. The question of a wise person is half an answer. That's the objective here. So as I said, because of time limitations, I just wanted to get the ball rolling and talk about it. And then, of course, come to answer. I know it's not good to ask questions without an answer. Like they said about Meir Nevuchim, then you go to sleep thinking that there's no answer, you only have the question. But I really, because of time, again, I hope I can ask you all to be patient, and we will address it. And I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback, because it is our issue, meaning collectively, for us, for our families, for our children, for our students, and for the next generation. We have this tremendous treasure that the Rabbeim invested so much with their blood, sweat, and tears and Mesiras Nefesh, and it's our job now is to make it as relevant, as applied, and as transformative as possible. Whatever we have the power to do. There are things only Hashem can do, I understand. But we have to do our effort. And this whole exercise, this whole discussion, is to seek, are we doing everything we can? Tu tells us it can't. And what more can we do? That's the ultimate goal here. So there's more questions that I'm going to get into. And hopefully we will get somewhere with this topic. Okay. I'm going to conclude with one question that was a follow-up. What guidelines should be followed in publicizing private materials of the Rabbeim? So this is a follow-up, and the person that's writing the question writes like this. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I really appreciated what you said about the importance of not publicizing private things from the Rebbe. Talking about a picture that was going around of the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin. It deeply resonated with me, and I think you're absolutely right. I've been thinking about this in connection to the Rishimis. The Rishimis are manuscripts that the Rebbe wrote throughout over the years, especially in the earlier years, that were discovered after Gimel Tammuz in the Rebbe's room, and they've been published now, first in Kuntresim, in small pamphlets, and then in books. Fascinating Rishimis. So he's writing. So I've been wondering, how is it that the Rishimis, I'm also been thinking about this in connection to the Rishimis. From what I understand, the Rishimis were also private writings of the Rebbe, and not something he gave for publication. In fact, I heard that the Rebbe also expressed strong feelings about not publicizing such personal writings from the other Rabbeim. So I've always wondered, how is it that the Rishimis ended up being published? Who gave permission? And if the Rebbe had wanted it publicized, wouldn't he have said it so clearly? If we're being real about respecting the Rebbe's privacy and what he would have wanted, how can we justify opening up handwritten notes he hid away in a drawer, let alone printing and learning from them publicly? Personally, I've always felt a kind of discomfort even opening a Rishima, like I'm holding something that wasn't meant to be touched. It's like going into a closet that wasn't mine to open. I don't mean to attack anyone, but to me that feels like a double standard. I'm just trying to understand this better and would really value your thoughts. Okay, as I said, we try to talk about everything openly. I've had another question similar to volume, I think, 15 of the letters of the Frierdiker Rebbe that were published. These are the personal letters of the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe to the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin. And there too many wondered, because some of them seemed very private. Would the Rebbe have agreed and wanted that to be published? So firstly, I'm also not here to second guess. There are editors in what we call Kohos, which is the official publishing arm of Chabad. They're human beings, of course, and they can't ask the Rebbe directly, just like we cannot. I would just hope that their conscience and their professionalism, they went through the proper rigorous due diligence before they made these decisions. Since I worked in the world of publishing, especially Isidis and Sichos, what we call Mareches Eitzer Achsidim, part of that Mareches, part of that. So I understand the responsibility. Publishing something is, like the Rebbe says, Tfus is Ledeiros. Publishing is for generations. So I'm not here to second guess, but I'll just lay out some guidelines, at least the way I understand them. You always want to make sure that whatever you're doing is without any agendas, without any strings attached, without any subjective agendas. Because as soon as you have some negia, meaning some bias, or you may make mistakes in your decision making. That's why when the Rebbe spoke about publishing things, he always wanted 3 people to look it over. And when I wrote Torah Meaning of Life, I gave it to different people to look over because it's inevitable. All of us are subjective, and also you're one person, shgias miyavim, we all make our mistakes. So that's critical in any type of decision when you're publishing something. Now there are things that were given to us to be published, and very clearly, openly published. When we wrote Farbrengens, for example, we know there are things we did not include. That's why it says chaser or chaser k'tzas. Because we know the Rebbe wouldn't have wanted to publish. Sometimes the Rebbe said something very sharp about himself. Or said something that, as he wrote once to me, I got a note from the Rebbe, not everything I say on Shabbos is meant to be published for the public. Meaning it was said on a Shabbos by Farbrengen to Chassidim. So you have to use discretion. And I'm sure there can be differences of opinion on this matter. That's why you want to have several opinions. So regarding the Rishimis, there was a debate, and I heard from Chassidish Yidden, some said that The Rebbe didn't give it to publish, so how do you know he would be agreeable to publish it? Others argue the fact that it was found in the Rebbe's room, and the Rebbe knew, and he could have easily found ways to make sure that it would be either hidden or clearly stated, never publish this, or given it to the library. I mean, there are different ways that Rebbe could have, means that he wasn't against it. Now, you could argue both ways. I don't know if there's a definitive conclusion. My thinking on it would be, what the Rebbe writes, remember, these are the shimsha of the Rebbe. However, there are some very sensitive matters and some very personal matters, private matters even. And some things were not published, just for the record. But some were, and you could argue whether those that were should have been published, or all of it should have been published. But there's also a thing called the Chassidus Geneva. Some things have been published not officially. Like, you could throw something out. The Reb Marash, they say, would go for a walk. And he wanted Chassidim to go into his room to copy the Maimorim that he had written. And when there was a big sreif in the time of Tzemach Tzedek, a fire that burned manuscripts, Tzemach Tzedek said, did anyone steal any of the manuscripts and would have preserved it from the fires? They said no. He said, where's the Mesilas Nefesh for Chassidus? So is this a license to go and steal? God forbid. But it means that sometimes you can give something out unofficially. That way, like the Rebbe did with Ayin Beis, he was concerned, whatever reason we don't know fully, he was concerned that publishing Ayin Beis would not be something that necessarily was that could be connected to something that was questionable. Sakana, danger. And the Rebbe said when he spoke about Yutas Kislev Tov Shalom et Zayin, that that there was a show. He said, I'm throwing it among Chassidim. Everyone will give $1 token. We won't print name on it. We're just publishing it. So it could be the way to go about this would be print the Rishimas that Kula Meidim are publishable, meaning they're not material that should not be out there for Yanika Sachetzenim reasons or others. But maybe do it in a way that's not so official. That may have been one solution. But again, I wasn't asked, so I'm just stating. But I'm trying to be objective about it. And then there are things that I think we could all agree that should not be published. But I think if you go with an approach of a humble approach, without any agendas, and really what's good for the public, and what the Rebbe would say, and you have a doubt, if you have a doubt, you probably have to do something to address that doubt. I think that applies to almost every item that can be addressed. And there are things that maybe shouldn't be published, and especially if there's a suffix who says you have to publish everything. That's a general approach that I wanted to throw out there. Due to time limits, we have to stop here because of the program limits time. So this has been MyLife Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. May we take the lessons of the yichud shimsha v'sira, the yichud of Zohan Malchus, of Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li, Chamisha Sabav, Chof Av, Esin Ba'av, and all the other themes that we've discussed, all through Torah, Yem Chasanos Zemat and Torah, and increasing and learning Torah every day more, especially Primis HaTorah, and it should be Yefutze K'Shefutze Meinesach Chutze Osei Marda Malka Mashiach. Everyone be well. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied.